Hello and welcome to the very first broadcast of the DigiTeacher Digest podcast. You're probably wondering, what am I doing in this ridiculous overcoat? Well, it's a bitterly cold Johannesburg day. I'm sitting in the school media centre filming this, and we have to keep the windows and doors open, and we're not allowed to use the air conditioning because of COVID. And consequently, I'm freezing my butt off, but no matter. What I'd like to look at in today's broadcast is the whole question of, is there a best method for teaching, and what implications does that have? So there is some research to suggest that at least some methods are not as good as others. So Kirshner, Sweller and Clark have done a lot of work and have suggested that direct instruction is far more efficacious, especially when it comes to novice learners. A novice learner, because they don't know much, can't really usefully do discovery method, for example. It's the old scholar's dilemma. How do you discover something if you don't know it's there? I mean, you're not even going to look for it because you don't know what you're looking for. On the other hand, if you're more experienced, that method becomes more efficacious. And Kirshner et al. Looked at this and saw in the sequencing of lessons, for example, even for novices, once you've given some direct instruction and they have a bit of knowledge, then discovery methods become more efficacious. So is there a best method? Well, clearly it depends on the context. For example, is the learner novice or more experienced? And N.S. Prabhu, in an article from 1990 in TESOL Quarterly, entitled "There is no best method, why?" looked at this whole question, and his argument was that basically no set of two teachers are ever going to agree on this matter, because in my particular context, with a certain set of students with a particular purpose in mind, studying particular content, method A might work best, but for you as another teacher, method B might work better. And therefore, we're never going to come to an agreement on which method is best. And so what remains? Well, Prabhu argued that what remains is a teacher's sense of plausibility, i.e. that what they are doing seems plausible to them. And the argument here is that if you believe in what you're doing, you're going to be better at it than obviously if you don't believe in what you're doing. So teachers' presence in the lesson, teachers' passion for the lesson are absolutely vital and will lead to benefits. So I suppose the corollary of that is that the enemy of education, the enemy of creativity in education at any rate, is routine, same old, same old. And we've all been students sitting in a classroom where the lesson dragged on and on and on, and every day was the same: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, teacher droning on, open your books to whatnot and do whatnot. And, we've all been there, and I think we have a good understanding of that is the enemy of education. So what do you do to combat that? What do you do to get some of the plausibility back? A few years ago, I attended a conference in Johannesburg, and one of the speakers was John David, and he spoke about how to unlock creativity in teaching. And he presented this particular creativity matrix. So if you think about it, any lesson has a particular context. It has a when, the time at which things take place. It has a where things take place. It has a what, the content of the lesson. How, the style of the lesson, the who's doing the teaching, who's doing the talking, who's leading in the lesson. And all of that becomes very routine. The teacher normally talks, the students normally write, they study the same kind of content. The content is usually on topic. It's always happening in a regular timetable, and it happens in the classroom usually. So how do you kind of captain, oh my captain, all over the show? And that setting the lesson free. And he suggested that you don't have to change everything. All you need to do is change one thing. So, for example, if you change the time, flipping the lesson, for example. So the kids do the reading or listen to the instruction outside of the classroom, and then they come in and do an activity in the classroom. Or you change the place. So instead of it happening inside the classroom, it happens inside the parking lot. If you change the content, so instead of it always being on topic, if you introduce a topic in another way by looking at something else and then bringing the content in later, if what the kids are supposed to do changes, so if they're doing a history essay as interpretative dance, I'm not sure how you would do that, but it would certainly make it a spectacle. If it's not always the teacher doing something, maybe you bring in outside experts, you bring in somebody's granny or whatever it is. So if I think about my career as a teacher, as a beginning teacher, newly qualified teacher, I had a lot of passion, a lot of energy, and that counted for a lot. I think I was quite effective, but sometimes I didn't know what to do, how to handle a situation. I didn't know a lot of stuff, and I think a lot of my lessons suffered because of that. Over the years, what tends to happen is you get a lot better at that kind of routine stuff. You become quite effective. Every lesson becomes workmanlike. Someone walks in, there's a sense of purpose. Everyone knows what they're doing. You're in control of the class. They're scoring well on the tests and all of that, because you become an effective teacher. But very often that passion goes missing. A lot of that plausibility gets lost along the way, and your lessons suffer because of that. Now, what you really want to do is to inject some of that passion and energy back, that sense of plausibility. Why are you as a teacher doing all of this? And what I found was it worked for me if I tried to change what I was doing very regularly. So I would take my content, for example, my syllabus, and I would introduce a new section. Or teaching poetry, for example, I teach a different set of poems. Or if you couldn't change that, if the set works, you had to do the Shakespeare. Well, teach different things within the Shakespeare. There are a lot of themes. You don't have to teach them all. So this year I'm going to focus on some of the main themes and this theme or that theme. And then you change it up, and the next year you teach slightly differently. Now, Shakespeare holds up well to that, because you're constantly finding new things about it. You really find out that Shakespeare deserves to be in the canon, because if you teach him for 20 years, you've still got something to say that's new and exciting to you. A lot of the set works that are set, the kind of young adult novels and things, don't have that. You teach it once, and by the time you're bored by the second time, because there's nothing new really to discover in them. So you can change the content, or you change the way that you teach. So, for example, a few years ago, I started gamifying my curriculum, and that kind of kept the energy going for a bit. You can't really, there are some things you can't change, like where you teach. You can take them outside into the playground, but the parking lot is quite dangerous, and you could take them up onto the koppie, teach them in the bush a little bit, but you're basically stuck in your classroom, and the when, is timetabled. So there's a lot of things you can't really change. What's missing from John Davitt's creativity matrix is the why. You've got the where, the when, the how, the who, the what, all of that, but you don't really have the why. And I found that changing the why can actually be the most efficacious of all. So let me try to explain that. So as an English teacher, quite clearly I'm going to be teaching some sonnets. And one of the things you want kids to know is the form of the sonnet. So I always used to teach some Petrarch. So they got the basic, the Italian, the Petrarchan sonnet form. Then obviously some Shakespearean sonnets, so that they get the Shakespearean sonnet form. And then you've got obvious questions in exams that you can set them on, all of that, what is the structure of the sonnet, identify the volta, identify different figures of speech and so on, and how does it advance the meaning of the poem. So basically the what is you're teaching the sonnet, the form of the sonnet. And then a few years ago, I decided to kind of change the why I was teaching that. I wasn't teaching the sonnet in order to teach the form of the sonnet. Hopefully that would come along with it. The why was I really wanted to teach them to be able to identify metapoetics. So to be able to look at any sonnet and see what the poet was really saying. And what most poets write about, of course, is poetry. I mean, that's what's essential to them. And most poems are at heart about poetry, about the process of writing, or about what type of poetry that they write. So in my grade 10 class, I looked at the Petrarchan sonnet, and we did the form of the sonnet. So we got that out of the way, octave and sestet, with the volta and the rhyme scheme and all of that kind of stuff. And then we looked at the Shakespearean sonnet, and we did the same. So we had the English sonnet format. And, where does the volta come? Usually just before the rhyming couplet. And so all of that, which I would have done. But my focus, the focus of the lesson was actually on the metapoetics. So in My Mistress' Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, what Shakespeare is saying, and remember that his mistress is his muse, he's talking about his poetry, just as Petrarch is. So Petrarch's overblown hyperboles are a statement about the type of poetry that Petrarch is writing. And when Shakespeare writes, My Mistress' Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, what he's saying is that his poetry will not be overblown hyperbole. He will tell it like it is. And then I went on to look at Christina Rossetti. And of course, in her sonnet, looking at her brother, the painter, she takes on the voice of the muse. What of the model sitting for the portrait? In other words, her poetry is going to be about the female perspective. And then you've got Edward Bow. And Edward Bow, there's a brown girl in the ring, is obviously addressing his poetry is going to be from a black perspective. And for me, what was really exciting about changing up that why, so that by looking at metapoetics, I could then set my class a challenge. And that challenge is in writing their own poetry, in their own production, in their own writing, to develop their own perspective and their own point of view. So no longer is it just about why are we reading all these poets? Well, we're reading all these poets to understand that the poet has a particular perspective, and that when we write anything, be it prose or be it poetry, we have our own perspective. And I find shifting the why part of the creativity matrix to be the most effective. Why is certainly, I think, the most important question that we have to ask as teachers. If we don't, then we run the risk of becoming totally routine, humdrum, and the whole venture becomes meaningless. I think certainly kids pick up on this. Why the hell are we doing this? And if we don't have a plausible response to that, then why the hell are we doing this? We might be very effective in terms of producing the marks, pushing kids through the system, but in terms of education, we've lost it.